All right, welcome to Bet the Edge. I'm Jay Croucher here with Drew Dinsick. Today we're going to break down some of the biggest matches this weekend in the NFL. We're also going to give out our best bets. We're not going to talk about the Los Angeles Lakers today, Drew. We'll save that for another Saturday. But first of all, the big news last night, outside of probably the highest scoring and least entertaining football game I've ever seen. I was never really interested by the game, but the big news from last night was Christian McCaffrey getting traded to the Niners. The betting market, I think, overreacted a little bit in the futures market. But how does this change your outlook of San Francisco?
I think you have to upgrade them in some way, shape, or form. I don't think the impact is going to be negligible. I still have questions about Christian McCaffrey making it through a full season healthy. Like he has to prove that he's going to be able to, stay on the field come, the important games at the end of the season for them. But the NFC is wide open. I had them in a tier of very realistic, potential NFC champions. For me, at least the top of the NFC is Eagles, Bucks, Niners, assuming that they can get to the finish line healthy. And the fact that Jimmy G is, he has won important playoff games in his career, and he's not going to give you that playoff stinker like some other quarterbacks might in his first ever, first foray, gives the Niners, I think, some room for optimism here. We were talking about it a little bit off the air. The league generally tacking a little bit more in the direction of the running game because of the way that defenses are scheming, and the fact that his unique skill set seems to match really, really, really well with what Shanahan would want to do conceptually. Like, it seems like a match made in heaven. I hope he stays healthy. I hope this is sort of the key to help the Niners, kind of launch into the elite status. But it's still a very inconsistent team. I still have questions about Jimmy G's ability to stay healthy. So I'm not rushing to the window to make any bets whatsoever. This just throws a little bit of cold water on my optimism that Seattle was going to threaten in that division.
Yeah, that hurts. I think McCaffrey, week to week in terms of his impact on the line, he's not going to improve the Niners rating as much as he destroys Carolina's rating. So the line with Tampa Bay go from 10.5 to 13 against the Panthers. The Niners line, meanwhile, dropped from +2.5 San Francisco home to Kansas City to +2. After the news, and that's with CMC expected in a relatively limited package, just given that the trade was 3 days in advance of the game against the Chiefs. I think that there's the argument that McCaffrey is the most valuable running back in football just because of what he adds in the receiving game. But at the same time, there is a cap on what just a running back can add in terms of affecting the line. I think CMC to the Niners is probably worth, when he's at full capacity, worth like a point to the line, and that's largely because Deebo Samuel is almost the closest approximation of Christian McCaffrey in the game, outside of probably Kamara and Eckler and Saquon. So I think that it helps, but yeah, I don't think it significantly moves the needle. At PointsBet, the Niners playoff odds, Super Bowl odds move from +1,700 to +1,600. So not the greatest deal of respect. Maybe I think that's probably about right, though, if you're talking about 1 point being added to the line and then extrapolating that out into Super Bowl odds. One interesting market I think that this may impact is that for Offensive Player of the Year, Christian McCaffrey was completely drawing dead on the Panthers, and he was +6,600. Now he's 50-1. It's a weird, I guess, it's a weird market to get your head around in terms of how getting traded impacts, his equity for OPOY. Obviously, it helps, but there's not much precedent for guys getting traded in any sport winning awards. But I do think that he has a path if he lifts this Niners offense and takes them to, the division and a 2 seed and leads the league in scrimmage yards, which, he's only 100 off the lead, is 50-1 McCaffrey Offensive Player of the Year. Anything you're interested in?
It's spooky because I didn't have that on my radar at all. And you know how we get to the end of the season and they tend to share the awards among the teams that deserve credit for how good their season was. Yes. I mean, if the Niners sprint home from here, and that's a 12-13 win team, and they're kind of clearly in sort of the top 2 of the NFC, and voters want to reward them in some way, that's probably the only case you can make for who should get an award there. I would guess. Am I missing something?
Bosa as well for Defensive Player of the Year.
You think he's still alive?
Yeah, I think he's alive. Like, he only missed one game, and Parsons didn't really do anything against the Eagles. So I think Bosa's still alive. But it is one to just keep an eye on. If McCaffrey explodes, probably not this week, but next week for 200 yards from scrimmage, then all of a sudden the drum might start getting beaten. Comeback Player of the Year as well. Now he's basically tied for second favorite with Geno Smith behind Saquon. Doesn't feel like he has much of a narrative the way that Saquon does in reviving his career. McCaffrey was just banged up. Now he's back. Wasn't a huge comeback story, but also one to monitor, particularly if Saquon goes down. Before we bring in Ben, anything you want to touch on from Cardinals Saints outside of a ridiculous little stretch of play from Andy Dalton?
I was holding on for dear life to that over after there's an end zone pick in the early going in the game, and it's like, oh no, is this how this doesn't get to 44? But then the back-to-back pick sixes, one of which I would not put on him at all, and one of which was extremely his fault. That flipped the game. I think credit to the Cardinals for running Kyler Murray more in the first half. Made the offense look a little bit more efficient. I think that the Cardinals, if they can keep Murray healthy, are going to be a bet on team because the market is still very, rating them, kind of as a bottom five. And if they're utilizing Murray more in the running game going forward, then that offense has a little bit higher ceiling. Yep. Also, Benjamin, that guy has some freaking pop, man. Whew.
I think he might just be better than James Conner. We'll see how that
might be.
Yeah, well, he probably is. All right, for all you college football fans that want some last-minute betting insight, tune into our NBC Sports YouTube channel Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern as Vaughn Dalzell, Brad Thomas, and Eric Froton answer your questions prior to a full slate of Week 8 games. All right, let's bring in Ben Brown from PFF. Ben, it's good to see you again, mate. Looking forward to talking about some of the biggest games on the slate. And let's start off with Chiefs, who are 2-point favorites at the 49ers. Like I mentioned, that was 2.5. Then the CMC trade brings it down to 2. The total is an extremely high 49. I know Patrick Mahomes is involved, but not a lot of respect for the 49ers defense, which is expected to have Nick Bosa back. What are you looking at in this game, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure the impact that Christian McCaffrey is going to have on this particular matchup. So I think the move down to -2 makes me kind of want to buy into the Kansas City Chiefs. I do think that, if the McCaffrey trade makes an already run-heavy offense even more run-heavy, and some of those targets that were going to Deebo Samuel and George Kittle are now funneled through Christian McCaffrey, I'm not sure that lifts their offense enough, I would say, to, be able to beat the Chiefs straight up. So the matchup that I am, really honing in on, and I do think that is the spot where the 49ers absolutely have to win, and is the spot that I think, maybe Christian McCaffrey opens up some things for, is Brandon Ayuk downfield. Now the Chiefs have, I think Trent McDuffie is going to be off of IR. It sounds like he is most likely going to be medically cleared to play in his first action, as a rookie. What can the Chiefs actually get from him? I do think is a pretty pertinent question, but, Joshua Williams, who was the guy that, kind of filled in that left cornerback position for them last week, got burned twice, one on the Gabe Davis touchdown to end the first half, and then again on the Stephon Diggs, both fly routes. So I think, if it's Joshua Williams, Brandon Ayuk is going to be able to take advantage of that matchup. We are going to see, 1 or 2 successful deep shots to him, especially with, all the underneath options that the 49ers now have. I think that's the way that the 49ers can win this football game, but I'm not sure if, the aggressive play calling or the path that they're going from a roster construction standpoint is going to focus in on that particular matchup and try and take advantage of it. So I'm a little bit concerned overall, and I do think that the Chiefs are, going to be able to do enough offensively against the secondary that I do still think is, pretty banged up on the 49ers side of the football. So I like the Chiefs -2. I like Patrick Mahomes over 2.5 passing touchdowns, and I do think this is a spot where, they get a little bit of a rebound after, that bitter loss to the Bills last weekend.
This is a really fun handicap in a lot of ways, especially for those of us who are in the analytic side of things, because you have to do player level adjustments now for a guy that's as important as Nick Bosa, a guy that's as important as Trent Williams. And now a surprise, you have to figure out if Christian McCaffrey matters. I think the market sentiment is there's enough positive player contribution coming back into this game overall that San Francisco ought to be shorter than what we thought, as we saw this line open. But it is also funny because there are certainly very influential bettors who only really look at quarterback as the only player that matters. And at the same, so this is ultimately still Pat Mahomes against Jimmy Garoppolo. And Pat Mahomes is not even asked to lay a field goal in that spot. So interesting matchup. And I couldn't really get involved on the side here, although I stared at that +3. Now I feel like I let something slip through my fingers. So, it's going to be a good game though. And definitely the game of the week, but pass for me.
Yeah, I think I would almost prefer backing the Niners +2.5 without Christian McCaffrey before that line moved. But I do think that with Nick Bosa and Trent Williams, like those are the two best players on the Niners.
Right.
Like they're better than Jimmy Garoppolo, Deebo Samuel, and it's just the ripple effect. It's not just Nick Bosa coming in; it's Nick Bosa, who I think last season was double teamed more than any other edge rusher in the league, and that makes everything easier for everyone else. Trent Williams, similar impacts on the offensive line. So if those guys are back and healthy, then I would probably lean towards the Niners and also lean, I think, towards the under. I think this Chiefs offense certainly has not been as explosive as it was previously, though it is still number 2 in PFF's rankings. That's what Patrick Mahomes will do for you. Okay, let's jump into Cleveland, who are 6.5-point dogs at Baltimore. The total there is 45.5. And Ben, I want to ask you mainly about Cleveland's defense, which I don't understand why it's so bad. Ranked 29th by PFF. They have a lot of talent. Myles Garrett back. He was the only real bright spot in that loss to the Patriots. But like, what's wrong with the Cleveland defense?
Yeah, I mean, for one, it's been run defense, basically. We have them as the second worst unit in the NFL so far, and they've been really bad on the ground. I also think, from a coverage perspective, Denzel Ward, very much not playing like a shutdown cornerback that we kind of expected him to be in the offseason. I think those two things, even with, a pretty dominant pass rush from Myles Garrett, he's kind of been the only guy without Jadeveon Clowney in the fold. And I do think, getting Clowney back, especially given, kind of the current state of the Baltimore Ravens offensive line, that's the spot that they absolutely have to win. And I do think if we see, Myles Garrett kind of continue to perform, I know he's, questionable still with the arm injury, but that has not slowed him down. He kind of had, I would say, a little bit of a statement game last week, 8 pressures, 2 sacks. Second time he's been at a 90+ PFF passing grade or pass rush grade. So he's definitely looked the part of, a defensive player of the year candidate. I think going up against, Morgan Moses, a little bit banged up with a heel injury. Ronnie Stanley finally played, the majority of snaps last week, but is still, kind of getting back to full speed after missing, a year and a half basically of football with that leg injury. So I think, they're going to have to double team Myles Garrett quite a bit. If they do, I think Clowney is going to be able to make, enough pressure type situations for the Browns, I think, to probably cover this one. I do think it very much sets up as a game where the Ravens are probably going to win by 30 points or have some sort of meltdown at the end and lose the game outright. So I think my favorite play is probably Browns money line right now at like +230. That's kind of the spot I lean in, and I think it's going to be a defensive struggle here throughout.
Okay, I got a ticket in my pocket. I don't really know why the market hasn't reacted to some of the injury news that looks pretty conclusive. And I would even point to the Brown side of the football. Wyatt Teller is not going in this one.
Right.
The offensive line is sort of the only thing you can kind of point to as the bright spot of the Chiefs. I mean, of the Browns, and really kind of gets their entire running game going. So they're up against a defense that I'd have a ton of respect for, even though they are not performing well in fourth quarters of games. This is still a decent, well-coached unit with a lot of veteran talent. I think that they know very well and have put together very good game plans for the Browns in recent years. I would expect that they execute that well, and I think they keep the Browns in the under 20-point range. And then it really comes down to, can the Browns defense show any improvement? It has been bad going for this unit for the last handful of weeks. They cannot get off the field. They cannot stop anything going on the ground, and that's obviously not great considering you're up against the Baltimore Ravens all of a sudden. But with Lamar dealing with some injuries and just overall, not a lot of health and well-being going on the offensive side of the football for the Ravens, I think this is going to be a little bit of an uglier game. So give me under 46 in this one. What do you with me on this, Jay, or do you think the Browns defense is too bad to play it under?
No, I don't mind it. I think that both teams will be running a lot, which is kind for unders, just bleeding clock constantly. I think that Baltimore, their passing game has just been like Devin Duvernay is the best receiver on this team at the moment of the wide receivers. Obviously, it's Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews passing game offense, and then pray for rain after that. We'll see if Rashad Bateman is healthy, but Rashad Bateman is not, outside of catching a couple of bombs, has not been the guy I think that everyone hoped that he would be coming into the season, and is dealing with injuries now. So I think both teams will be running the ball, and I would skew under there. Ben, you mentioned Myles Garrett, Defensive Player of the Year. I think it's a really interesting market at the moment, and Garrett is the third favorite on PointsBet. I think he's going to struggle just because the Browns are 2-4. There's not a lot of buzz around him. I think the past 15 winners of Defensive Player of the Year have all been on winning teams, so that's going to hurt him. But if you do believe in Myles Garrett, DPOY, the reason is that his division features 3 teams that love getting sacked. Lamar Jackson, not afraid to run into a sack. Joe Burrow, we know his propensity to take sacks, and then Kenny Pickett as well. Expect behind that Pittsburgh offensive line is going to be in a lot of trouble as well. And Cleveland still has 5 games against those 3 teams, and so that would be Garrett's path, is to get to 20 sacks, flirt with the sack record, and that will probably start this week against Baltimore if that happens. But let's get into one of those teams in those divisions, which is the Pittsburgh Steelers, who play on Sunday Night Football on NBC against the Dolphins. The line is 7, and the total is 44.5. I think probably, I guess the casual bettor or just casual NFL fan, the Dolphins laying 7 points might seem a little bit steep. But Ben, where do you lean on this line?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is like a hot take or it's just going to be an unpopular take, but I do think the Steelers' offense has been so much better with Mitchell Trubisky at quarterback so far this year. So I'm kind of waiting on, the Kenny Pickett concussion situation. It does sound like he's probably, in the final stages, if not already cleared concussion protocol. If he is, I'm assuming he's going to start. That maybe makes me, back off the Steelers a little bit, because he's been, more conservative, I would say, than what Mitchell Trubisky's put forth. I do think they need to be aggressive in this spot if they are going to cover 7 points. I do think they need to hit some shots downfield, to some of the receivers. But I just don't know if Kenny Pickett's willing to kind of put the ball in harm's way a little bit in order to kind of do that. So I'm worried about the Steelers side. I do think it's probably only the correct side. It seems like the market, is expecting Tua to kind of come back and be exactly where he was at through the first 3 weeks of the season when this Dolphins offense was, the best team in the NFL from an EPA per play perspective. And I think that's, kind of a tall order with, Jalen Waddle, a little bit banged up, questionable. I do understand it from, a match perspective with the Pittsburgh Steelers secondary being, so banged up. And I do think Tyreek Hill can definitely take advantage of a guy like James Pierre, but I'm worried about both sides of the football, so I don't really have a strong take on it. But I think with Mitchell Trubisky announced as a starter, I'd probably lean on Steelers +7 in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a fair look, and I also think Pickett in, Freiermuth in, both guys breaking clear concussion protocol. That does help the Pittsburgh offense quite a lot in this game. Miami's offense, I think, was going to have no problems getting into the high 20s. Tua coming back and expecting, you don't even have to expect what we've seen from him this season, which has been excellent. I think just an average Tua game, he gets so much support from Hill and Waddle. Those guys are just so outstanding that I think Miami has a pretty brilliant matchup against a Pittsburgh defense that I still think the market is overrating to a degree. So this is an over or pass for me. And I think realistically, Tyreek Hill, we talked about him yesterday. I think he's due for a huge night. This is a primetime spot for him. I know that guy lives for these primetime games. He was the best player on the field in the last primetime game that the Miami Dolphins played in a loss against the Cincinnati Bengals. And he brings it in the big moments. So expecting a lot from Hill in this one. And I think if Kenny Pickett, he brings more chaos, there's a potential more potential for turnovers, shorter fields. He's not afraid to throw the ball down the field, and it doesn't really seem like they're treating him with kid gloves. So even though he wears 2 gloves, so it'll be an interesting to see if he kind of slides into the role that they have for him there in the offense. And if that Pittsburgh offense gets 20 points, I think this thing sails over 45.
Yeah, Firstly, Drew, getting a little greedy with the Tyreek Hill request for a big game. Ben, if you don't know, Drew and I both think that Tyreek Hill should be the favorite for Offensive Player of the Year. He's plus 1,600, and we're invested in that. So due for a big game. We did have 177 yards last week, but he's due for another big one. I agree. On prime time, it'd be great to build that case. Just before we let you go, Ben, just want to ask you about the Miami defense, which to me is one of the more interesting units right now. They ended last season excellent on defense, had a very defined identity, just blitzing every single time and then having Xavier Howard hold up. But they have been a below average unit. They're 17th by PFF grade, and that's probably on the higher end of where a lot of systems are rating the Dolphins defense. Do you think it's just a question of, Xavier Howard getting healthy, the secondary getting healthy, and that this should be an above average unit the rest of the way like they were last season?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think, Xavier Howard's a guy that I've, always really liked from, cornerback perspective, has been really banged up this year. So I think with him back and in the fold, obviously they do blitz a ton and rely on a ton of one-on-one coverage in the secondary. And they just kind of don't have, the pieces in place with him, especially if he's kind of, banged up with that hamstring groin type injury situation. So I think if he does get back to full strength, they are going to continue to kind of manufacture pressure through the blitz. They do have a pretty high pressure rate, already. And we have them as, I would say, a little bit above league average from a pass rush perspective. So as long as that coverage unit can get back and healthy, I think they have the pieces in place to be, a top 10 defensive unit. And when that happens, if Tua is, back and in the fold and they get all these wide receivers healthy, they're very much, I would say, a contender overall in the AFC.
I like it. Blue skies ahead for the Dolphins, which Drew and I need for our Tyreek Hill Offensive Player of the Year position. Need that team to make the playoffs. All right, Ben, thanks as always for joining us. Can you let people know where to find your content?
Yeah, definitely. So I, on Twitter, PFF_Ben Brown, you can definitely hit me up in the DMs or, direct message or anything like that. I have a lot of content on PFF.com, do a podcast on Sunday, the PFF forecast as well. We talk about some of the look headlines and everything else. And yeah, it's a good time. So any, betting fans, anything else, definitely get through a lot of player props and some of these other derivative markets. So you can definitely check out all my work at PFF.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. And a reminder to everyone, you can follow Ben on Twitter, at PFF_Ben Brown. All right, just a reminder, if you don't have the NBC Sports Predictor app, go download it now. The contests are free and easy to play, and you have a shot to win thousands this weekend by predicting what will happen in college football, on the NASCAR circuit, and in the Premier League, where my beloved Gunners are now plus 550 to lift the trophy. Unbelievable. There is also $100,000 up for grabs by guessing the outcome between the Steelers and Dolphins in our Sunday Night 7 contest. All right, Drew, one of the Sunday Night 7 questions this weekend is Tyreek Hill, our man, receiving yardage bands. The bands are less than 50 yards, and then it goes through to 110 plus. Which band are you taking for Tyreek Hill's receiving yards?
I almost feel like they got the player wrong here because Tyreek Hill should not be anchored around 65. He should be anchored around 100. I would take over 110 and not really think twice about it. Great matchup for him against a beaten up secondary here for the Pittsburgh Steelers. All top 3 cornerbacks dealing with injuries, both safeties dealing with injuries. Tyreek Hill, if he gets into open space against this secondary, he is going to cash, and I will take over 110.
Okay, we're supposed to make different picks, but I'm not. I'm going with you on this. 110 plus for Tyreek Hill. He's gone 160 plus 3 times already. So I think this is clearly the play. He has so much upside, as any player in any game. So give me 110 plus for Tyreek Hill. All right, let's jump into our favorite bets for the weekend. Drew, you have the honors first. You have first serve. Who are you taking?
I've gone back and forth about the right way to attack this game because I think the total is way too high and I think the dog is well underpriced. Ultimately, I'm going to go with my best bet as the dog money line. And it is, of course, our brilliant Seattle Seahawks taking on the LA Chargers.
Let's go.
5 points separate these teams? No way. No way. The injuries that Los Angeles is dealing with right now are still being undercounted, and this offensive line is not going to be healthy anytime soon. The backups now are dealing with injuries. You've seen regression from the young players on that offensive line to boot, and they're going up against the Seattle D line, which through the first 4 weeks of the season was really suspect. It was probably the most kind of underperforming unit we saw across all of the NFL, but they looked very competent last week. they made a couple of scheme adjustments as to how they're deploying their front seven, and I think the Seattle defensive line is going to be quite strong here. Put some pressure on Mr. Herbert and really kind of turn this into an ugly ground game. And in that world, I mean, give me the Seattle rushing attack against the Los Angeles Chargers defense, which still cannot stop the run. This is Seattle in my mind, with an outstanding chance to get the win. I think Seattle money line was my play last week. We're going right back to the well. We're getting even better odds this week. So almost 2-1 for the Seattle Seahawks, who have the better running attack, a decent and improving young defense against an absolutely beaten up team on a short week. This is a solid look for me.
Yep, I love it. Back on the Geno train, why not? Take us to the NFC West, promised land, Mr. Smith. Look, I think that the good thing with Seattle is that I didn't think that their defense had the ceiling that they showed last week against Arizona, who I know are in all sorts a little bit and didn't have DeAndre Hopkins for that game, but they did have Marquise Brown, and to keep that team to single digits was very impressive. I don't like to talk about how good Tyreek Woolen is because I don't have anything on him for Defensive Rookie of the Year, but he is very good, and he's helped change the complexion of that defense. Now, my pick, which is one I think we might disagree on, but I'm taking the Cowboys -7, home to the Detroit Lions. Dak Prescott is back. He is going to play. And my angle here is that I just think that the Cowboys are a potential juggernaut. That it's weird because it's the Dallas Cowboys, but I think they might be a little bit underrated. And the angle here is that, look, they were the number one offense by DVOA last year. Yes, they are missing some pieces on the offensive line, but I think that they have that type of ceiling. And we know how good that defense is, which is, I think, undisputably a top 5 unit in the game. We saw what they were able to do with Cooper Rush. I think Dak Prescott comes back, gives them a ceiling. I think this Detroit Lions defense has no ceiling whatsoever. It's just bad. It's bad every single week. I think the offense, which we thought was going to be a really good unit, Jared Goff is showing his weaknesses. The offensive line has been fine, but not perhaps the unit that we thought. They're going to get some guys back, but they're still banged up. And I just think that the Dallas defense against that Detroit offense is going to subdue them enough. And I just think that Dak Prescott, first week back, he hasn't been rushed back. There was the thought that he might even be back for the Rams game. They gave him an extra 2 weeks. Think that he should be relatively healthy. And I think that Dallas should have no problem whatsoever piling on the points. I think there'll also be some incentive in Dak's first game back to maybe not take the foot off the gas late on. So give me the Cowboys -7. Do you want to make a point for the Lions, or are you with me on the Cowboys?
I'm not with you on the Cowboys, but you've made a strong enough case that I'm not going to play the Lions.
There you go.
I've been waiting on this one because I figured that the Dak news was going to move this number up to 7.5, 8 even. And at that point, I was going to get involved with the Lions. Mostly just this is sort of their last chance to save their season. They're coming off by any schematic adjustments that they possibly could make to try to improve the defense. We're going to see it in this game. And in the back of my head, I still feel like the rating of the Cowboys with Dak and with Cooper Rush was never really quite correct. And so an upgrade on Dallas for bringing Dak back off of an injury like this, it may take him a couple weeks before he's the Dak we remember. So a little trepidatious about Dallas all of a sudden being a juggernaut. But if you want to look long-term and say that there is a sleeping giant in the NFC and it is the Cowboys, I'm fine with that because a lot of the questions we had about this team and in terms of who they were going to be this year are starting to be answered. The defense is good. They're schemed well. They have great talented players. The offensive line is performing better, and Michael Gallup has now returned from injuries, so the wide receiver room looks a lot less sparse. So plenty of positives in the long run here for the Cowboys, but I was inclined to take the points with the Lions. So you've talked me out of it.
Very good. Yeah, I do think that, people are going to look back on that week 1 game where Dallas scored 3 points against Tampa Bay. Like, now they have Michael Gallup back. That's significant. They have Noah Brown has taken a step up. The offensive line, while still not whole, has a lot more continuity than it did in week 1. So I think that the Cowboys are the looming team in the NFC. Before we go, quick question on NBA looks this weekend for you, Mr. Dinsick. Any nice NBA spots that you like?
I multi-popped the Celtics and the over tonight against the Miami Heat. Not buying the Heat defense whatsoever. not sold that the market is correctly rating how good this Boston offense is yet. I think Boston can get into the high teens, maybe 120. This is going to make or break my October for NBA. Probably it's a short, I mean, it's a short month. I'm not going to have a ton of volume this month.
10 days left in it.
I know, but yeah, this is going to be a big decider for me in the month of October. So let's go.
I like it. Okay, tied into that, my two best bets tonight on the NBA, two player props. Jason Tatum, his points total is set at 24.5. And Bam Adebayo's points total set at 15.5.
Whoa.
I don't understand those at all. I would always have them both almost 3 points higher. So I blind bet those. I haven't even really deep dived into it, but I just think those lines are just completely wrong. And if you like the over as well, that ties nicely into that. All right, we are done. Don't forget to check out NBCSportsEdge.com for more information to help you with your wagers. Thanks for those of you watching on the NBC Sports YouTube channel. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please don't forget to rate and subscribe. From me and Drew Dinsick, have a great weekend. Go Seahawks, go Cowboys, go Tatum, go Bam, and we'll be back on Monday.